Hey everyone, it's Fox from modelmaking.guru here, back with part 4 of our build of DeAgostini's studio scale Millennium Falcon. Okie dokie, right, parts 4 and 5 have arrived, or issues 4 and 5. We have some new things to play with. We have cockpit tubery, woohoo! We have some framework, some more framework, sidewalls for the cockpit, screws and fixer plates. And we have our first bit of electronical shenaniganery, Shenanigan, that's not a real word. Our first bit of electronics, first bit of lighting to go behind the cockpit. Shenaniganery. I don't know if that's a real word. I like it, I'm using it again. Anyway, might not be a massively long episode today, and I know I say that every time and end up cutting down an hour and a half into about half an hour. I was hoping to show you the complete painting process. So from priming, pre-shading and actually spraying the base coat, because I haven't shown you that yet. But these parts that have come, they have little holes for extra bits to go on, extra little greeblies. So I can't show you that. I don't want to paint them and then have to do the greeblies. So I'll wait till I got the greeblies and get them stuck on. For those of you wondering, greeblies are all the little fussy details that make a surface look busy and interesting. There you go. What we shall cover today, we will get the sidewalls painted, so I can show you a bit of the painting process. We've got the front plate as well for the cockpit. We'll get the frame put together, we'll get the lighting installed. If I get a chance, I'll also cover this thing. This is the battle damage on the cockpit tube. At first I thought, Christ, that's not very good at all. But then looking around, there's not a lot of reference pictures out there, but there are some, and it's not that bad. I was thinking I'm going to have to fill the whole thing, but I think what I might actually do, because I can live with that once it's painted over and get rid of this black nonsense, what I might do is actually put some filler behind it and then drill it out a bit just to give it a more cone-like shape. If you look at the filming model, it does seem to actually go through the plastic into the hole behind. So it just needs to be not flat and a bit deeper, I think, to make it interesting. So if I get a chance, I need to pop to the shops and get some filler. So we'll see if we can do that in this episode. So we'll go off and we'll get these screwed together, add them to the rest of the frame, then we'll do these bits and we'll try and get as much of this done as possible. So we'll get this done, back in a moment. Okay, right, it's time to start screwing around. You see, screwing, never mind. Anyway, right, let's get this done. This is the frame we made last time. This is the two pieces we have today that we now need to attach and macate, after I've checked my focus, attached to this fellow here. So, you know how this works. There's no point me telling you how to screw a screw, because I'm sure you probably figured that one out. So I shall activate the super speed, super fast, fast forward, super fast... Bye! And we're done. Nice plating. Well, not plating at all. That's completely the wrong word. Nice framework. Okay, right. The next step is to stick on. Now, the magazine says you don't need to attach any hull plating now until you've basically got the whole of the framework. So you're going to have a big metal skeleton sat on your desk for months. But it does suggest fitting the first piece you got, this one, just so you can understand how it works, to see the principles involved, to use their phrase. So we're going to do that now. Let's have a look. So these little nubbins here slot into these little holes here. Keplunk. Now if you tried fitting this already, you'll have noticed it doesn't really want to stay on very well. Except now it does. Okay, now it does want to stay on very well. Well, we've got these extra ones now. Okay, fit the plating over the frame assembly chone, checking that the 8 lugs on the plating have fitted into the matching holes in the frames. Cool beans. Fix the plating with the silver screws supplied. Okay, right, these are screwed in. this thing ain't going nowhere. So that's our first piece of hull plating bolted on to the frame. I've not done them too tight. It says not to do them too tight, so I've not done them too tight. It also says you can attach the second piece now, but don't screw it to the base. You can just put it on to see how it fits. And there you have the completed piece. And I must say I'm impressed with the way they've designed the seam lines, so it blends in with the panelling, so you can't actually... Well, you can see there, but it just looks like panelling rather than anything else. So cool. It's rather impressive. Right, so that's that out of the way. That's the totally not hard for anybody in the world to do bit. So we'll put all this away. And what we shall do next is some of the cockpit painting, I think. So, back in a moment. Before we go on to the next bit, I thought I'd give a quick thing about airbrushes. Now, there's two ways you can paint a model. You can use an airbrush, or you can paint it by hand, by brush. Brush painting is absolutely fine. Downsides are you can end up with thick layers of paint, and you can end up with brush marks all over the model. It can still look brilliant. You're going to weather this model anyway, so it's going to look scruffy. But if you want to go that extra step, you want to think about maybe getting yourself an airbrush. Now, if you've never done any kind of modelling before, and this is completely terrifying, then airbrush seems a bit unnerving and a bit like, whoa, it's dark magic. But it's not. This is my airbrush. It's a DeVilbiss dagger. Airbrushing is actually quite straightforward. It just takes a little while to get the knack of what to do. I'll just get this out. Basically, an airbrush is just a way of feeding paint to your model in a very fine misty spray that will give you a very, very thin coat of paint, very fine texture, and give you great control. When you saw the panels I did with the pre-shading, I used my airbrush to control how much paint went on the model to get very fine dark lines. You can also use an airbrush for flat coverage to cover a whole area in one colour if you want to. There are lots of different types of airbrush. Now, for those of you out there who have never used an airbrush before, or never even done modelling before, you wouldn't want to go for something like this straight away. This is a professional airbrush. It's about 130 quid or something. You probably want to go for something basic when you first start out, because what you'll want to do is get something that's not too expensive, have a practice with it, get used to it, get used to how to use an airbrush. So you might want to look at something a bit more basic, like a Spraycraft, which you can get for, say, 50 quid. Badger do some lower price airbrushes as well. There are other makes you'll come across, like Harder and Steenbeck, or Pash, or sometimes people call it Pasha, Iwata. Lots of different airbrushes. I mean, there's nothing stopping you going straight in and buying a top-notch airbrush straight away and going straight in. It has a bit of a learning curve, so if you go and buy an expensive one and struggle with the learning curve, you've spent all that money and you'll be very disheartened. If you start off with something a bit more cheapy cheerful, you can learn the foibles of an airbrush. Now, it won't be the perfect airbrush, it'll have a lot of problems or a lot of limitations, but it'll give you a chance to learn how to handle the paint, what an airbrush can do. The other thing you'll need is a compressor, possibly. I run mine off a little compressor. I'll show you a picture now. Now, that little compressor is a cheapy chips one. Compressors can go anywhere from 80 quid to several £100. A very good compressor will have a pressure regulator on it, so you can control what the pressure of the air is. It will have a moisture trap to catch any water so it doesn't come out in your paint. Have an air tank so it can build a reservoir of air to give you a steady airflow. Mine doesn't have any of that. Mine cost me like 50 quid from Hobbycraft. I can't control the amount of pressure that goes through it, so it's however much air wants to go through, that's how much air goes through. But it works, and it does the job. So until it breaks and dies, I'll probably stick with that. It's absolutely fine for me. But I'm topping it with a professional airbrush. And like I said, I'm not professional, so I'm probably not getting the full potential out of this airbrush. When you're looking to buy one, again with a compressor, you don't actually have to start with the compressor. Basically, you need to feed air through the airbrush. If you want to start off and just practice, you can use pressurized cans of air. I haven't got any here to show you. But when I first started out, I had a cheapy Spraycraft airbrush, and I used about this big, can of compressed air. You hook it into your airbrush, it's on permanently, and when you pull the trigger, the air comes through. They run out quite quickly, and they're not cheap. They're like £4 or £5, maybe more. But when you're just starting out, it's a good way just to learn and practice before you start committing to an airbrush. Because if you buy an airbrush and a compressor, you can be spending... You could go on eBay and get a nice deal, but you know, you could spend a couple of £100 on a really nice airbrush and a really nice compressor, brand new, or get something decent on eBay, and then find you don't like airbrushing. So I'd start cheap. Look for the cheaper ones, Spraycraft, Badger, things like that. The things to look for in an airbrush. These are by no means absolute rules. This is my personal preference. I'm sure people will disagree with me all over the place. Absolutely feel free to. This is what I prefer. There are 3 types of airbrush. Well, there's several types of airbrush. What you really want is what's called a dual action or double action airbrush. This is the trigger. On mine it's a double action airbrush. It controls the airflow and the paint flow. You push it down, the nozzle comes up here, there's a little valve in there, air comes out. If I pull it back like that, that controls how much paint comes through from the paint reservoir. So if I just push it down, I'm blowing air, I can dry paint. If I pull it back a bit, I can spray paint. The more I pull it back, the more I can spray paint. That's double action. There are single action airbrushes, and they're literally just, most cases, just a pull back or a push down. And you have no control over how much the ratio of air to paint. You can control how much air and paint altogether goes through, but it's less flexible. And they're really designed for just covering a large area quickly. So if you can, get yourself a double action or dual action spray gun, airbrush. There's 3 types of feed. This is a gravity feed, which means this bit here is where the paint goes. The paint's in here, it's pulled down by gravity. The paint wants to get sprayed, it wants to come out and go through the nozzle. This is the best one, ideally for me, because it's the least hassle, it's the easiest to clean. This just screws off and you clean it out. Alternatively, you may see a siphon side feed, which is where the little cup goes here at the side. It's not really worked on by gravity as much. It comes down and then it goes into a little tube that comes into here, so it's sucked through. They're just as good. The only thing is they can be a bit more of a pain to clean, because you've got to clean in here and you've got to clean in here, and you can't really get anything into the tube to clean it out. So it can be a bit more of a hassle to clean. And the last type is siphon feed, which is a bottle underneath the spray gun, the airbrush. I think they suck horribly, and literally, no pun intended, they do suck. That's how it works. It sucks the paint up. I think they're horrible. You're relying on the air going through, using vacuum pressure to push the paint up. If the paint's a little bit too thick, it's going to struggle. And cleaning the bottle and taking it off is an absolute pain. You've got to clean the tube, you've got to clean the bottle, the thread on the bottle, the lid. It's just a nightmare. I got sick of using those when I first started out, because they were just a pain to clean. So if you can get yourself a gravity-fed one, or at a pinch a side feed, absolutely brilliant. One other thing to see if you can get it, they probably have them anyway, but this bit on the back here is a control nozzle. It controls how much paint I can pull through. What it basically does is control how far back I can pull this trigger. When it's all the way to the right, I can't pull that back at all. That's just air. All I can do is get air. If I turn it all the way to the left, I can pull the trigger further back. I get more paint coming through. If I'm doing a fine line, I'll turn it to the right, so I get very little paint. If I'm trying to get big coverage on an area, I'll turn it to the left. You get more paint. And if I'm trying to vary or control how much, I might give myself more paint, so I'll turn it to the left, but I'll only pull the trigger back a little way. I can ease myself in. In terms of compressors, if you can get yourself a nice one that's got a moisture trap and it's got pressure controls and a gauge and everything else, brilliant. If you're just starting out, you don't need to. The little one I've got, I showed you in the picture, cost me 50 or 60 quid. It does absolutely fine. Yeah, it's not got an air bottle or an air reservoir, so sometimes it's a bit spluttery, but it works. And that's it. That's what you're looking for in an airbrush. I won't go into like cleaning and everything else. Don't want to make this video too long. But yeah, if you're interested, or if you've never tried one, it's worth trying. Borrow somebody else's or get a cheaper one. Just have a play with it. Even if you get a bottle fed, a siphon feed one from Halfords for 30 quid. They've got little spray crop ones at like 30, 40 quid. They're not brilliant. They're fed off air cans, but it's a good way to practice and get used to spraying paint rather than brushing it. I would say, if you can, go the airbrush route, just because it gives you a lot more control and you can do a lot more things with it. But if you want to go brush painting, that's absolutely fine. That's no problem at all. You won't be able to do some of the things that I do on mine, like the pre-shading, but you can still get some fantastic results. And I only really use this for paint layers, base coats and things. I don't use it for like fine details or weathering or anything like that. But that's Airbrush basics. I'll probably go into more detail on other bits, but to avoid the waffle, let's crack on with those hull parts. I have primed them. I'm just waiting for them to dry. Hull parts, cockpit parts. They've been painted with Tamiya surface primer. As I said before, rattle can, no problem. I don't care about primer. I'm not trying to get nice blends. Just need it on the surface. That's it. Bang, spray can. I can cover a large area fast. Don't need to think about it. You can spray primers through airbrushes. It would take you approximately 25,000 years to paint this Falcon in its full size with an airbrush. Nothing wrong with that, but I don't want to do it when I can spray it with a spray can. You get a nice fine coat. It's primer. It's not that important. People are obsessed and say you must do it through an airbrush. Go with what works for you. For me, spray can is fast, it's efficient, gets the paint on there, the primer on there. That's all I need. So they've been primed. I will set up with a bit of towel here. I'm not going to do it in the spray booth because I can't film in there, so I'm going to do it here. They're only small pieces, and we'll start doing some spraying. I'll do a little bit of masking as well. So back in a moment. Okie dokie, right, it's time to start spraying these little puppies. These are the 3 cockpit pieces. I've been debating about the colour of the cockpit, and it seems to be there's no definitive, conclusive imagery out there that tells me exactly what colours the cockpit are that I've been able to find. So I'm going to stick with my German grey, which, if you remember, was this kind of bluey grey colour. But I'm also going to add some black parts. What I'm going to do is paint maybe the top halves of these black, so I'll mask that off and paint a black section. So I have my De Vilbies dagger. I have some Tamiya, you can't see this, I can't tip it up, XF63 German grey. I've stirred it around with a cocktail stick, make sure it's nice and stirred. I also have some Tamiya X20A thinner, and I have a little squidgy pipette. All I'm going to do is take some of the paint. Now the Vallejo paints are quite good because they come with dropper bottles. Tamiya ones don't, sadly, unfortunately, so you have to just pour them. People have asked me what my ratio of paint to thinner is. No idea. I kind of wing it and play it by ear. So some thinners, like Universal's modelling products thinner, is about 50-50, I think, with Tamiya. You can spray Tamiya paint straight from the jar. They are designed to be airbrushed, but I find a little bit of thinner just helps flow a little easier, helps the paint come through the airbrush. So I'm just going to put a little bit of the paint in there. I don't need a lot because I'm not doing a lot of spraying. The beauty of these gravity-fed airbrushes, by the way, as I was saying earlier on, is the gravity-fed ones end up with using less paint. They're more economical with paint. I'm going to get my little pipette of some thinner, and let's do complete science. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That sounds about 8. That sounds about right. I don't want it to be a wash or too thin. I just want it to be a little bit thinner to go through the airbrush better. Give it a stir with a cocktail stick, get it mixed in. And before I did this, I ran some airbrush cleaner through the brush just to make sure everything was cleaned out. So I'd normally do this in the spray booth, like I've said, but for the benefit of the filming, I'm doing it here. So I've got some tissue up to protect my desk. But let's get this going. Turn the compressor on. Just make sure the paint's coming through first. As I was saying before, you push the trigger down, you get air but no paint. Pull the trigger back, and you start to get paint. The more I pull it back, the more paint comes through. Now I don't need a massive amount of paint on here, I nearly swore then. So I've got the dial about 2/3 of the way to the right, so it's not that far. The more I turn it to the left, the more paint will come through, the further away I can hold the airbrush. The more I turn it to the right, the less paint comes through, remember, I can hold the airbrush closer. So let's get these coated. Dead straightforward. I'm going to move the pieces rather than move the brush too much. So always go air first, just to get the air through, because sometimes you get a bubble of air that goes pfft. So don't go straight in with the paint, always start with the air, then slowly pull the stick back to increase the paint flow. Nice and easy. I want a thin dusty coat. I'm not looking to pile up paint in large amounts. I don't want to make pools of paint that'll blob everywhere. And that is painted. One other trick, when you turn the airbrush, the compressor off, just push down on the air so you don't get air trapped in the cable, in the compressor cord. You don't get a blob of air at the start. I'm going to give it a couple of minutes just for this to dry to the touch. Then I'm going to turn them over. I've primed and painted both sides because I don't know how much of the back side is visible in the cockpit, so I'm going to have to paint both sides. So give me 2 seconds. I will let these dry for a second, turn them over, and we'll spray the other side as well. Actually, no, you know what? I don't need to film that. You've just seen me do this. When we come back, I'll have painted both sides. Okay, right, all those cockpit pieces are now painted on both sides. What I'm going to do now, my plan is, based on some pictures I've seen, I want this top bit to be black and this bit to be the grey. So what I'm going to do is basically mask off that part. So I'm only going to spray paint here. I'm going to use Tamiya masking tape. You get it in various widths. This is the, what size is it? 18mm. It comes in this little dispenser so you can pull it off and rip it. I call these Gundam feet. Anybody that knows Gundam will know why I call it a Gundam feet. All I'm going to do is put some tape across here. I'm going to use 2 different types of tape. So first of all, the Tamiya tape. I'm just going to pull that off. Now it's difficult for me to do this with the camera where it is because I've got to be a long way away. So I'm going to put the tape down at a slight sort of 45-degree angle. I'm using, notice how on this tape this edge is all crumpled because of the dispenser and this edge is sharp. So I'm going to use the sharp edge. So I'm going to place it on the piece as best I can. Now my head might get in the way here, but as best I can see where that edge is. I'm just going to move it around. I've stuck one end down so I can manoeuvre the other end. Seems about right. I'm going to get myself a little cocking tail stick. I'm just going to run it along the edge just to make sure it's all flat and flush. So the edge is pressed right down. The good thing with Tamiya tape is it's very low tack, so it's not going to pull your paint off, or it very rarely pulls your paint off. If you want to reduce the tack even more, you can just get the piece of tape and just dab it on, say, your trouser leg or something, and that will reduce the tack even more. So that is that mast. Now what I tend to do is, I don't need to do it here really, but to protect the other bits, if it's a big piece you can use bits of paper or whatever you want to do. For this I'm just going to use some, normally I'll use 3M blue tape, but this is crappy decorator's tape. It's a bit strong tack, so I don't ever stick it directly if I can avoid it onto painted plastic. I'll only ever really try and stick it onto other masking tape. And it saves me using my slightly more expensive Tamiya tape. And that is now masked. So what I'm going to do with this is just quite simply spray some black on here. I'm going to spray it this direction so I don't get any black on the back. So the back will still be grey. This bit will be black. It might go around the edges, but I can paint that in with the brush if I need to. So I've done the other one here. So I've got both pieces. I'm just going to rip that off because it's a bit long and ungainly. Oh, the other thing is when you're doing tape of any kind and you're wearing rubber gloves, it's just, get off with the sticking and the... That's these masked off. I shall now get myself some. I've got some Tamiya XF1 flat black. So I'm just going to get that. Give it a quick twizzle with the old stick. This just gets all the stuff from the bottom of the jar into the top. Sometimes the pigment settles out, so give it a quick twiddle with your stick. I've done it a minute ago anyway, so I don't need to do a lot. Get my Tamiya thinner. Same as before, I really need hardly any now, so just a few drops of black paint. It's actually easier to say that than do it with Tamiya paints. I need hardly any. Here's half a jar. Brilliant. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 we'll say. I've got less paint, so I'll do 5 drops. Give it a quick stirrage. And so we have the black paint in the airbrush. Little blast of air. let the paint go, because I've changed colour, I'm going to let the paint flow through for a second just to get any remaining German grey out. There, they see the black kick in. I don't know if you saw that on camera. It went from a grey colour to a black colour. So I'm going to turn the paint down a little bit because I don't need too much. When you're doing masking, you want as little paint as possible because you don't want it to pool under the tape. So light coats, light delicate coats. What I'm going to do is pointing it this way at the piece, blow it out my hand. Brilliant. Light coat. Oh, hang on. Not rooking the tape, it would be a good start. Light coat. And that's enough. That's all I need. Same on the other piece. Air first. Ooh. Try again. It's quite a blast from this airbrush. Air first, then paint. Very lightly. Pulling the trigger back only a little tiny bit until I get paint. Done. Enough. That's fine. That's absolutely all I need. Okie dokie. Right, that's had time to dry for a little while. Time to remove the masking tape. See what came out the other side. So, trick with masking tape. When you pull it off, don't just yank it off. You always want to pull it back on itself. It helps keep a crisp edge, and it also avoids pulling off any paint on the part underneath the masking tape. So let's get this pulled off. Oh yes. Now a little bit of paint has come off there, but that's when I was spraying it, so that's going to be painted over anyway. This one as well. It's always a bit of a nerve-wracking moment. Fabulous, there's lovely. So as you can see, we now have two nicely varied pieces. Now that will become more subtle when I do washes and stuff and discoloration on this German grey. This will become darker anyway, so it'll become more subtle. So that should be soon. I was going to start painting the details on these, but I'm not sure what's coming up in future episodes or future issues of the magazine. There seem to be more stickers, and I don't know if they're preferred around the cockpit or the dashboard or what, so I'm not going to start painting these raised details just yet till I know I've absolutely finished the cockpit, because I don't want to spend ages painting all these little tiny details and then find that yeah, that's all covered up with stickers, thanks. So that's where we're going to leave the cockpit. I'll just put it together just so you can see. This is what we've built so far. It's not glued together, it's just snap fit as the kit would normally be. So I'll just snap these in. We'll see what we've got so far. One thing you will notice when you paint things like this is that plugs that went into holes before you painted them now don't go into holes quite as well, because the layer of paint makes them slightly bigger. Right, there we go, finally, that's everything stuck together. Yeah, the paint has made the sort of the tabs slightly bigger, so it's harder to get them in the holes. That's my excuse. So we've got this German grey paint everywhere. Remember, these aren't stuck in, they're just loose and the back's not glued on. It's German grey right now. There will be washes and weathering on that to darken it, but I'm quite happy with that so far. I think I like that kind of... I mean, it's probably not canon, it's not accurate, but I quite like it. Now, I don't know what goes around here, or under these gaps here, so possibly nothing, I don't know. So I don't want to go too far now and then find there's loads of stuff covered up. So I'm going to leave the cockpit there for today. That'll do. Last thing I'm going to show today, because we're getting a bit long now, is what we're going to do with this puppy. I'm going to take a strange route. Instead of filling this on this side and then making my own damage, I'm going to fill it on this side and tunnel that out a bit. Because I'm quite happy with the size. Looking at various photographs I've seen, it's probably about the right size. It just looks massive because they've painted it black because bad weathering. What we're going to use for this is we are going to use some filler. This is Milliput, standard yellow grey filler. I was hoping to get some of the super fine white, but for what I'm going to use it for here, it's absolutely fine. So, Milliput is a two-part filler, as in it comes in two parts. What you do is you mix both together in equal amounts, make a blob of filler, apply that to the surface. For this I'm just making a blob, so I don't really care if it's too much or too little. I'm just going to make a blob of stuff and let it go hard. If I was, say, filling a seam, let's say I wanted to fill that panel line there, I'd take a small amount, I'd get it on the surface, I'd then wet it and just work it in, blend it in, let it harden, then you can sand it down. So you get the grey and you get the green. Basically on their own they're just a bit rubbish, but when you mix them together they form a chemical reaction that then makes them harden and bond. So what we'll do, we don't need a lot, so I'm just going to take a little bit off the end here. I'm going to take something similar off the end here. It needs to be similar amounts. And then I'm going to wrap them back up, because if you expose them to air for a long time they just end up going hard and useless. So we'll put those to one side. We'll probably get to do some more milliput in more interesting ways later on, but for now we're just using it for this blob. All I need to do is make a blob of it. So I'm going to wet my fingers, just because it sticks to your fingers like billio, and you need to knead these together. So all I'm doing is kneading this until it becomes a uniform colour. So that's all we've got there. All I want to do is basically stick this. Now I'm hoping to God there's nothing going to go inside here, because if I know the cockpit goes here and there'll be some wiring, but I'm hoping against hope that this doesn't all go wrong and I've just blocked off some important part of the tube that needs to be not blocked off. But what I'm hoping to be able to do is just to drill into that a little bit, and it'll have the milliput behind it, so it'll be like extra surface. I can just drill down and make a more hole-like hole, rather than this kind of popped. Looks like it's popped a blister. It's not very nice. Right, so that's that. That's done. Typically, it dries to the touch in about I can't remember now. It's been so long since I've used it. Like an hour or two. But ideally let it cure overnight, 24 hours, longer if you can, before you start drilling it. And I think it's like 2 or 3 hours before you can drill it. I'll check, actually. I'll check and I'll put it in the subtitles below. So that's going to do me. Once that's done we can drill at some point, and then once we've done the drilling we can do the priming. I'll prime the other half. Again, it was just rattle can primer. But that is going to do us for this time, I think, because I'm running a bit long. So we'll leave that to harden. When we come back next time, I think we'll have the last few bits of the cockpit, so hopefully I can crack on with painting. Now I don't know how I'm going to show you that, because it's going to be me close up, so it might be a case of here's the cockpit I've painted and here's what I've done, rather than actually showing you painting it, because I'm going to have to get close with my old man eyes and my tiny fine brush, so not sure about that. One other thing as well, when you first get these two cockpit, let me just clean my fingers from handling all this stuff with milliput everywhere. When you get the two tubes of the cockpit, obviously it's tempting to put them together and put the cockpit in place. Just to avoid breaking any of these little tabs, when you first get them, drill out the hole a little bit with the knife blade. I can't remember if I showed you this earlier on in this episode, I'm so rubbish. Just get the knife in the hole and just twirl it around. And just expand it a little bit. That means that when you put this in place, it'll come out easy. You can take it apart easier. And also, don't glue them together. Now it says that in the magazine anyway, but common sense tells me, as we're putting the lighting on the back of here, that we're going to have to put wiring and stuff in here. So what I'm going to do is not glue this together till I know there's nothing else to go in the cockpit or in the wiring for the lighting at the back. Which I haven't done, and I forgot about that, so we'll cover that in the next one. But that's going to do us for this time. As always, thank you very much for watching. Check out my website, modelmaking.guru. I've got blogs and all kinds of things, other builds on there. I do commissions and other works. I'm really having trouble actually stringing sentences together. I'm very tired today actually, so I do apologise that I'm just kind of going a lot. It's one of those days. Yeah, go along to modelmaking.guru, check out other stuff, pieces for sale, commissions. I'm posting these videos and other ones, done builds for e-models as well. And I'm also on Facebook, facebook.com/modelmakingguru, and on Twitter it's just @modelmakingguru. So go along and hang out. Thank you for watching. Thank you for following. And thank you to all those people who've said that I've helped them paint it. I'm glad I can help you. I'm glad I'm inspiring people to do something they never tried before, or do something they never thought they were good at, and suddenly found, actually, you know, I can do that. So, fellow builders, keep at it. We'll catch up next time. You're probably all far ahead of me because I joined this story late. So, we'll see you next time. Until then, as always, adios amoebas.